Hello and welcome to the President's Podcast, right here on the record with the Ohio Senate. The views, the news excludes. I'm your host, John Fortney, the Director of Communication for the Republican Caucus, the Majority Caucus in the Ohio Senate. Joining us as always, Ohio Senate President Matt Huffman, a Republican from Lima, and we are very fortunate today to have on a leading national voice in the effort to preserve the integrity of women's sports and Title IX. Nine-time All-American from the University of Kentucky swim team, the women's swim team, Riley Gaines. Thanks for your time today.
Well, I'm glad to be here, so thank you.
You came to the Ohio State House to support and to testify in support of House Bill 68, which does a couple things, but one of the main things it does, it protects women's sports here in Ohio. Why is that so important for you?
This should be an issue that's important to every single person, regardless of if you're just a female athlete. I mean, regardless of all that. This should matter to everyone, and it matters to me because I have lived experience with this. The effects of allowing a male into a women's competition, what this looks like, losing out on opportunities, not to mention the locker room aspect. And I'm here in Ohio because I believe every girl, regardless of which state, deserves to be protected and shouldn't have to physically compare themselves to a male.
I said you were a 12-time All-American at UK, 5-time SEC champion, SEC record holder in the 200 butterfly, making you the 10th fastest American of all time in that event, and you're a 2-time Olympic trial qualifier. But let me take you back to 2022 and really what put you in the national spotlight, not something that you were hoping would happen or looking forward to. The 2022 NCAA Swim Championships. Tell me what happened.
So it was my senior year. We're gearing up, ready to go, and the NCAA released a statement saying they would be allowing males, specifically male swimmer Leah Thomas, formerly Will Thomas, who swam 3 years on the men's team at University of Pennsylvania, to, of course, then switching to the women's team his senior year. The NCAA released a statement saying Thomas would be allowed to compete in the women's category. Actually, they said it was a non-negotiable, his participation, meaning there was nothing we could do, no questions we could ask or concerns we could raise as female athletes. We were told we had to accept this with a smile on our face. And so I got to personally witness and really feel the effect that this infringement, this injustice had on myself and my teammates and my competitors. And I don't claim to speak for every single girl on that pool deck, but I do claim to speak for the overwhelming majority of us because I can wholeheartedly attest to the tears that I saw, not just from the moms in the stands watching as their daughters are being obliterated in the sport that they once loved, but also the tears from the girls who placed 9th and 17th and missed out on being named an All-American by one place. And I can wholeheartedly attest to the extreme discomfort in the locker room when you turn around and there's a 6'4" male fully intact with and exposing male parts. And I can wholeheartedly attest to the whispers of anger and frustration from those girls who, just like myself, had worked our entire lives to get there. And so, of course, that first day of competition, Thomas swam to a national title, becoming the first man to win a Division I NCAA women's title, beating out Olympians and American record holders by body lengths, which is a very large margin.
In the 500 freestyle.
In the 500. And then the next day was the 200 freestyle where Thomas and I raced, and we actually ended up tying, meaning we went the exact same time down to the 100th of a second.
Did you get a trophy?
I was denied the trophy despite tying, and when I asked why, the NCAA officials told me that they had been advised that when photos were being taken, it was crucial that Leah was holding the trophy. And that's really what thrusted me over the edge into no longer being willing to lie, to smile while we stepped aside. I suddenly saw, of course, again, I knew all season what was happening was wrong, but I saw the severity of it and the trajectory of it if someone didn't do something, and no one was doing anything.
Did you feel intimidated, canceled, pressured not to say a word?
We were ingrained to. We had to go to special trainings. We were told, you
went to the Nancy Pelosi School of Deprogramming.
Yeah, no, we really did. Literally, the verbiage they used was to re-educate ourselves. If we didn't feel comfortable seeing male genitalia, or if we weren't okay giving up our opportunities to a male, then we were told we were the problem. We should apologize. My school specifically, they told us, look, you don't want to speak out because if you do, you'll never get a job. You'll never get into grad school. You'll lose your friends. You'll lose your scholarship and your playing time. Speaking of that scholarship, remember, you signed that letter. And when you signed that scholarship, you gave away your rights to speak in your own personal capacity because you represent us. And we've already taken your stance for you. Remember whose name you wear across your chest and your cap because it's not your own. It's your school's. And again, we don't permit you to take a stance.
Mr. President, you have daughters. I have 2 daughters. The anger that I'm feeling right now, it's a bizarre world. It's a bizarre scenario and situation. And how did we get here? What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I think the way we get here is if you're in a chamber, if you're in a room where the only way that you can stay in the room is everybody is saying the same thing, and the only people permitted in the room are the people who are saying the same thing, strange thoughts happen. That's really the whole point of the First Amendment, is new ideas, fresh ideas help move us forward as a society. And what higher education has become is one of the things we're trying to deal with in Senate Bill 83 that the Senate has passed and it's sitting in the House, is the fact that there are almost no conservatives in administration and in teaching in higher education.
No common sense.
Yes. Well, and so those folks all say the same thing to each other. And when a competing idea is like, we can't be serious about this, right? We're not going to have a man and a woman's, we can have, maybe they have their own restroom or something. And when that idea isn't just, now we think you're wrong, but you're out if you say that again, that's the beginning of the end of the truth as we know it. And so that's how we have it. It's interesting when you say you give up your rights if you've signed the scholarship letter. It's a great documentary on Bill Walton and the Wizard of Westwood, his basketball coach, John Wooden, and the struggles that they had as coach and player, because Bill Walton was a liberal's liberal. He was a marijuana smoking guy who wanted to go to college and one of the best basketball players of all time. And there's you can see the documentary footage of students at UCLA protesting the Vietnam War. And right in the middle of all these guys is this 7-foot redhead. It's Bill Walton. Well, nobody's telling Bill Walton that he's not allowed to say that. In fact, these days, we cheer people who protested, not everybody, but protested the Vietnam War because it was a legitimate action to protest the government and do things like that. But when you're telling students today, you're not allowed to speak, and we're not even, and in the back of these rooms, people are going, we're not sure if this is right or not, but it's what's come down from high. And that is really what has collapsed in higher education. Today is one of the reasons we passed Senate Bill 83.
House Bill 68, actually, with the Save Women Sports Act, really brings back Senator Christina Rogner's bill, Senate Bill 132 from the prior GA. And do you think that part of why we are here now with having to bring forth legislation to address this issue is that the people that are in control of the Democrat Party now are trying to, the radical end of it, are trying to normalize deviant predatory behavior in some way. They're trying to normalize behavior that 5 years ago would be like, you can't allow a man to be in the women's locker room. If that was something that happened on the street, they would be brought up on criminal charges. But now we're allowing this behavior to happen within certain collegiate locker rooms.
Yeah, I think what happens is there's a group of people, and the loudest voices make their voices heard. And if there's not a process to say, hey, wait a minute, you may be the loudest, but you're wrong. But then those folks are excluded. The moderates have been excluded from the Democratic Party. And again, the real problem is when you have a decision-making structure that exists in higher education where true dissent is not considered. Here in the Ohio General Assembly, if you don't like the bill that's whether you're in the minority or the majority party, whatever it is, you get up and talk about how bad it is. And, so the public knows. None of that is happening in higher education. People should look at the Wall Street Journal article this weekend about what's happened at Ohio State University. Again, what we're doing about Senate Bill 83. So I think it's the kind of thing that George Orwell was writing about in 1984.
You know, Riley, when I talk about normalizing this deviant thought process or things that normally would have been absolutely dismissed 5 years ago, now the Biden administration is prioritizing gender identity over biological sex when it comes to Title IX.
It's a lot broader than just women's sports, even what they're doing, which I believe what they're doing is an abomination to the original intent of Title IX. What the women in the 1960s and 70s fought relentlessly for, because it's undermining that. And now in these women's same lifetime, they're seeing those opportunities that they so relentlessly fought for. They're seeing those opportunities being taken away. And so what this means, this new rewrite, which Title IX, it's only 37 words, with one word, activity, being the word that gave us the opportunity for the equal opportunity to compete. They're rewriting it, like you said, to equating sex to gender identity, meaning men would have full access to bathrooms, locker rooms, changing spaces on campuses. Men could take academic and athletic scholarships away from women. Men can join sororities, which we're already seeing happen at University of Wyoming. And of course, men could be randomly housed in dorm rooms with women. And under this new rewrite, if you, as a 17-year-old girl who was randomly assigned a male as your roommate, felt uncomfortable and went to your administration and complained and asked for a different roommate or for other arrangements, you would be guilty and charged with sexual harassment. Same thing if you didn't use preferred pronouns under this new rewrite, guilty and charged with sexual harassment.
When you're the one at risk, this is not necessarily a fairness issue. This is also an issue of danger to women participating under Title IX in women's sports.
Of course, in the locker room aspect, like you said, but also when we bring up danger, you have to think about sports that do have some sort of physical contact aspect. Whereas in swimming, I didn't necessarily have to worry about being injured in my sport, but other sports, like field hockey, for example, which we saw in Massachusetts just a few weeks ago, there was a young player on Dighton-Rehoboth field hockey team. They were playing Swampscott High School, which allowed a male onto their women's team. This male hit the young woman on Dighton-Rehoboth's team in the face so hard that all her teeth got knocked out.
Video of that on Twitter.
And it's a really disturbing video because you watch and her teammates can't even bear to look at her. She's left on the ground screaming, of course in excruciating pain. Same thing with Peyton McNabb, a high school senior at the time, playing volleyball. Again, same story. Male jumps up, spikes the ball, which I want to mention, a men's volleyball net is 7.5 inches higher than a women's net. It's almost as if they're acknowledging the biological advantages do exist. But this male jumped up, spiked it in the face, hit Peyton in the face, and she was immediately knocked unconscious. Still to this day, a year and 3 months later, partially paralyzed on her right side. Her vision is impaired, her memory is impaired. She's not playing college softball like she was supposed to. So yeah, the safety aspect is a big portion of this Title IX rewrite and why this matters. And let me be clear, the message that we are being sent from the Biden administration, from even some of the leaders here in the state of Ohio who oppose HB 68, the message we're being sent loud and clear is that we don't matter. We as female athletes, we as women, we don't matter. Our privacy doesn't matter. Our safety doesn't matter. Our equal opportunities, our fairness, our feelings, our dignity, no, that doesn't matter to them. What matters to them is protecting the feelings and the identity of a male.
You said months ago during a post-session reporter gaggle that to you this is really an issue of just common sense fairness. And now we know all about the danger that can be there, not only in the locker room and being uncomfortable and feeling violated right out of the box, but this is simply a fairness issue based on physical difference of stature and strength between biological males and biological females.
Yeah, and you know, we can all think of some extraordinary exception to the rule where there's an extraordinary woman athlete who, you know, there's a story about a woman who can be a kicker in college. That may have happened once, or sometimes a soccer player that doesn't have it, the high school team doesn't have it. But those are the exceptions, obviously, and And kudos to Riley that she could actually take this man to a tie in a national championship. I mean, that is an extraordinary story in and of itself. But those are the rare exceptions. So besides the safety aspect of it, besides the locker room aspect of it, we get, anybody who's had children play. My daughter Ellen was a great, and both of my daughters were great golfers, but my daughter Ellen was, Claire and Ellen both, but Ellen went on to play in college and at Wagner. And there's obviously a difference between how far men can hit the ball and how far women can hit the ball. And in every other sport, golf is a lot like swimming. You're not going to get hurt by the opponent. But if you're talking about sports like the ones that Riley was just describing, it really is a dangerous thing. So I had a question for Riley, and it kind of leads into what you said. I got a call from one of my constituents in Western Ohio. One of the people who worked at their office had a daughter who was likely going to win a state championship in a sport. And they wanted me to talk to the parent. I talked to the parent. They wanted me to know how fair this was, that the Ohio High School Athletic Association shouldn't be allowing this. And this is in the previous GA when we were talking about this bill. And I said, well, that's great. When Matt Huffman says it, as Tom Suttis calls me, I'm just a white male from a small town. So from Tom's viewpoint, my opinion doesn't matter.
We're being discriminated against, clearly.
Exactly. But I said, it's important for you to come and tell your story to the committee, because otherwise, as I said, it's just a bunch of people in Columbus talking to each other. And their response to me was, I get what you're saying, but we just don't want to be drug into all that. I don't want my daughter to have to go through it, but I do want you to do something about it. And I guess that's sort of my question for Riley is, you talked about dental school, you've obviously got a bright future ahead. Why are you doing this when a lot of people wouldn't?
I was in that same position too. Truthfully, almost ashamed to admit it, I was, right? I was waiting for someone else to stick up for me and my teammates because I thought someone would. I didn't think it was my responsibility. What did I know, right? Being 21 years old at the time, I just wanted to compete. That's all I wanted. I thought there was someone in place, someone who was supposed to be protecting us. I thought, naively, they would protect us. And ultimately, I remember the moment distinctly when I realized that thought was naive and that was wishful thinking, was when we were standing on the podium, holding this trophy again. I know I have to give back. Sharing my spot with a male towering over me at 6'4", I'm standing there, having talked to the other 6 females in the race, and they felt the same way that I did. Yet we were on that podium, including me, again, smiling and clapping and cheering. Okay, well, what were we applauding? We were applauding our own erasure, our own demolition. And that's when it hit me. How in the world could we expect someone to save us if we weren't even willing to save ourselves?
They were willing to sacrifice you and your teammates on the altar of woke.
Of course. And that's what it felt like. That's the message, again, that we received. But I felt compelled after that. I felt guilty. I felt responsible. I felt, again, ashamed that I had waited to speak out until after I had competed. I think if things were different, I would go back. And again, I believe it all happened for a reason, and I certainly believe in God's timing and His direction in different things. But if I were to go through this again, I simply wouldn't compete. But we need more bold people. We need more people willing to speak the truth. I have people ask me all the time, how do you find the courage? How are you so brave? And I say, easily, because I'm saying the most common sense thing. We all know it, right?
Yeah.
There are 2 sexes. You can't change your sex, and each sex is deserving of equal opportunities.
Can't change your chromosomes.
No, exactly.
One of the things that I want to read a couple quick sentences about the analysis of House Bill 68, President Huffman. 1, it requires each school that participates in athletic competitions or events administered by an organization that regulates interscholastic athletic conferences or events to designate separate single-sex athletic teams based on the sex of the participants. Secondly, it requires each state institution of higher ed or private nonprofit college or university that is a member of the NCAA, NAIA, or NJCAA to designate separate single-sex athletic teams in sports based on the sex of the participants. Is this a way to protect Ohio student athletes from these reforms coming from the Biden administration regarding Title IX? In other words, the feds can say one thing, the NCAA can say one thing, but here's what we're doing in Ohio.
Yeah, and I don't think it's just Ohio residents, because obviously these teams, these athletes come from a lot of different places. It's not just Ohio high school football players for Ohio State or Cincinnati or the other great football teams that we have, or the other or great sports. So it's protecting a lot of other people, and I think the number is up to 23 or 24 states that have passed similar legislation. And really what I sense in the discussion over the last 2 or 3 years and I've been part of a couple of private conferences with the NCAA, what I sense is that the NCAA as a governing body has lost control of much of what they do. We can see that with college football realignment. They're not making the decisions, the individual schools and conferences are. And they have a very difficult decision-making. They have over 100 committees. When an issue goes to a committee, there's no end date for when a decision has to make. So things go into a committee and they pen there for 4 or 5 years with members coming on and off. So it's almost a body that can't make decisions. Somebody decided a long time ago, we talked about North Carolina in 2016, that this is the path we're going down. They don't know how to stop it internally. They don't know how to get people in the room and say, we think we've made a mistake. The states that are passing this, like Ohio soon will, I think, that will enact this into a law, are bailing the NCAA out and the other organizations that you mentioned, because they've lost control with this. If the Biden administration goes forward with these changes that they're talking about in Title IX, it's going to be serious election repercussions. There's opinions about these kinds of issues, and there's certainly different opinions about this, and we talk about bathrooms and gender reassignment surgery, all of these kinds of things. We have different opinions about this, but this is a plus 70% issue that we're talking about. There's almost nothing
Those
that
are
gets
rare.
passed by. Yeah,
Those are rare.
I mean, the only thing that ranks higher than that is should we fund career tech education more? 85% of the people want to do that. But when you get something like that, that means that 80% of the Republicans are for it, but so are 50 or 60% of the Democrats, and more importantly, a large percent of independent voters. So this is going to happen because there's certainly, and I think when Riley gives the stories about the locker room, a tie vote, but the other guy gets the trophy, all of that, that's like a moment in time. But people step back and say, wait a minute, I've got a daughter, I've got a granddaughter, I've got a wife who's participating, whatever it is, and they say that's just not fair, and they're willing to vote that way.
And send a message to cancel culture, which, as you were explaining about from your constituent, cancel culture is very real. People are afraid to say the wrong thing for fear they might lose a job, they might be canceled, ostracized, and you certainly have felt that on college campuses where you've gone to speak.
Of course. I have been, I would say the message is generally well received, especially among college students, because I think they're hungry to hear the truth, where they're in a setting where they're pretty consistently denied that opportunity. So majority of the time, of course, it's well received.
Yeah.
That being said, the loud minority is just that they're very loud, and they're very angry. They're very hateful. They're very spiteful, vengeful, I would say. Unhappy, miserable, I think is the best word for it. And so there have certainly been times where I've had some of the most obscene, profane, heinous things you could yell at someone. I've been spit on, I've been hit, I've been punched, I've been held for ransom for 4+ hours, where these protesters demanded that if I wanted to make it home to see my family safely again, I had to pay them money. All the while, the police were being held for ransom with me. Of course, this was in San Francisco. The police are being held for ransom with me. I'm looking at the officers like, can't you do something? I'm pretty sure this is, we're being held against our will, and I'm pretty sure we call that kidnapping. So can't you do anything? And you know what the officers told me? No, actually we can't, because we're not allowed to be seen as anything other than an ally to that community, or we'll lose our jobs.
And you wonder why crime runs rampant in big city, Democrat-controlled metropolitan areas.
I lost a lot of hope in the justice system that day.
You must have been terrified.
I was. Truly, I feared for my life. After, first of all, it was an incredibly disorienting situation. I was rushed, so they turned off the lights, rushed to the front of the room, and that's when they attacked me. There were men in dresses with beards. It was a very disorienting environment. So I was very confused what was going on. I was supposed to meet the campus police an hour and a half before the event to discuss what we would do if a situation arose like it did, and the police never showed up to where we were supposed to meet. So it was just a very disorienting situation that, I feared for my life.
If it can happen to Riley, it can certainly happen to your daughter. And moms and dads that take the time to go to the basketball games, to go to the football games, to go to the soccer games, and sit in the stadium, sit in the bleachers during all kinds of weather, these are now, Mr. President, the parents that are showing up at school board meetings to put their foot down and say, enough's enough. Let me read you some excerpts from some books in your own elementary school library. This is unacceptable behavior.
Yeah, first of all, we need to understand primarily that local school districts are controlled by their school boards, and those are elected by the residents of those school districts. That's your governing body. And for the most part, Americans want to go live their lives. We're going to have a government, they're going to do what they want. This is what happened, by the way, between 1783, when the British left, and until we had a constitution in 1787, everybody just went about their business. And George Washington and James Madison all wondered why no one's acting like we're a country. Well, because they didn't want a country. They just wanted to have their farm and their community and do what they want. And we ended up with the Constitution, but only because of George Washington. But now we have a situation where a lot of people who really didn't participate much in what the governance of what their local public school was doing. They paid their taxes, maybe their kids went to school, they went to the football games, and that was it. This policy in particular, even more than paying more taxes or other things, have invigorated a group of people who otherwise were not going to be involved in schools. And I just was on a call today with somebody from a Cleveland, Cuyahoga County School District, and this is a Republican. He said, we took over the school board, and it was all because of this issue. And now that's probably going to affect a lot of other issues. And so a lot of folks have woken up and said, look, I'll pay more taxes, but when you're going to do this, you're out superintendent, you're out principal of the school. I'll just say this, an issue like this happened at a local school district in Allen County. You can go read all about it. It had to do with the school board members saying, well, we're advised by our lawyer that boys ought to be able to use the girls' bathroom. Well, the parents didn't like that, especially the parents of the girls, and they demanded that it change. They wouldn't do it, and they just voted that school board members out and put 3 new people on. Now, set aside the fallacy that some lawyer told us the federal government said we had to do this at our school, when all the other schools around you weren't doing it. It's something that they obviously made up or wanted to believe. But those folks are out. And they may have otherwise been good school board members. They understood finance, they knew about hiring good teachers or whatever. But you're out if you're on the wrong side of this issue. And that's not just in Allen County, Ohio, it's also in Cuyahoga County and all over Ohio and all over the United States.
The way you answer cancel culture is to vote those people out. I wanted to get back to a final thought from you. When Leah Thomas won the 500 freestyle in 2022, and you brought it up in your testimony in support of House Bill 68 this week. You referenced the Oberlin College, Ohio women's lacrosse coach, Kimberly Russell, who said this on social media following Leah Thomas's 500 freestyle win. She said, congratulations to Emma Wyant the real woman who won the NCAA 500-yard freestyle event. That got her reassigned at the college from her head coaching job to a job more on the administrative side for speaking out. She was canceled within her own university, but she fought back. She was reassigned.
Well, and Oberlin is kind of a liberal school,
Very
right?
liberal, right? And they've had
That's an understatement.
they had a bad track record as well that cost them a $20 million
right.
settlement recently. That might be another show. We know that the left will try to silence voices. What is your message, your best advice to teenage girls wanting to be on the swim team, the lacrosse team, the soccer team? What is your message to them?
First and foremost is to not get discouraged. I think, truthfully, if I looked back to when I was a young girl, and if I would have seen just my final meet of my career where I'd be competing against a boy, I wouldn't want to compete, right? Because, people say sports are about fun and camaraderie and yes, those are benefits of playing sports. But to me, sports were about winning. Let's be real. Even from a young age, to get me to where I was when I had ultimately graduated college. So don't get discouraged, first and foremost, because truth will always prevail. I believe sanity will always prevail. Unfortunately, sometimes we don't know how long we have to endure the craziness, but I do believe the tide will eventually turn. And secondly, understand that courage is contagious, and that one person speaking up can inspire so many. Just as much courage is contagious, I believe hopelessness is as well. And so if I can be of any encouragement, of course, it's stand firm in the truth. Be bold, be strong parents also. Be willing to defend your daughters because they need you. Being 21 at the time of that meet, again, I waited for someone to stick up for us. And we were failed by so many. And so parents, coaches, be willing to defend your female athletes, your daughters. This conversation also very quickly gets centered around girls and women, naturally and understandably so. And we ask ourselves the question of where are the feminists, which don't even get me started on Megan Rapinoe. But I think just as often as we ask ourselves the question of where are the feminists, we should be asking ourselves the question of where are the men? Where are the dads? We need strong men as well. So be those strong parents for your daughters, defend your daughters, and teach your sons masculinity.
12-time All-American at the University of Kentucky, Riley Gaines. Thanks so much for your time.
Of course.
We appreciate it.
Thank you guys.
Great, thanks for coming on, appreciate it.
No, you guys
Nice to
rock.
meet
Very
you.
grateful.
Thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you soon.